Colossus is the most advanced lineup optimizer in daily fantasy sports. Lock and exclude players. Adjust player exposure to reduce risk of injury or poor performance. Customize individual projections or upload your own projections. Generate hundreds of optimal lineups in seconds. Name and save the best lineups. Create winning lineups for the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel for free at dailyfantasycafe.com.
Hello and welcome to the Blitz Podcast, a defense analysis. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. Of course, you wrote up this nice article for us here. And this past week, I won't say that it was all defensive disappointments, but as it has been the last couple weeks, teams in good spots disappointing, teams in okay spots overperforming, things of that nature. So always going to have things like that, you know. Obviously, the way these things are scored, you could have a good defensive game, but due to offensive turnovers and game flow, you know, end up having bad DFS games. But either way, starting that off with a team that I had a ton of last week, and I would play again 99 times out of 100 in that same spot, is the Arizona Cardinals. You've got them listed here against the Detroit Lions, and the Lions are a team that it looked like it was a close game with the Seahawks last night, and it was on the scoreboard. But in all reality, the Seahawks moved the ball. The Lions really didn't, aside from some turnovers that kind of went their way. So I think they only, all but 2 possessions they punted on, I believe it was, except for that turnover at the end. So definitely a team that still is just really, really struggling on offense. And, I mean, if you got anyone that can match up close to one-on-one with Calvin Johnson like Arizona does, you don't really worry a whole lot about the rest of the team.
Yeah, and usually I like to take defenses at home, but I should say before I really get into this that there really aren't any clear-cut, plays you must have. In previous weeks, we had, say, 2 or 3 plays that were, clearly the chalk, so to speak. They were just in a great position, and it really didn't make sense to fade them in cash games. If you look through this column and you look at the ownership percentages, you'll notice that I have all of them, kind of relatively low. Usually I have at least 1 or 2 30 to 40% owned type of plays, and I don't see any like this week. So you can do a lot of different things and maybe try and get a little bit sneaky because we just aren't really sure with the defenses this week. Having said that, backing the Arizona Cardinals really isn't a bad position at all. As we said last week, they're a very opportunistic defense. Maybe getting a couple pick sixes, and Stafford has just been bad this year. That offensive line has been the stem of all of their offensive woes. Throughout this season, the Lions have just 4 touchdowns over the past 3 games, and like we said, they got shut out in the touchdown department, offensive touchdown department, I should say. They did get a defensive score last week. But yeah, really didn't get anything going against the Seahawks. So Arizona, I'm imagining they can shut them down. And I think it's a high upside play. So when you're in doubt, go with the upside. And I think the Cardinals have it this week.
Yeah, certainly. Anytime you're facing, like you said, a bad offensive line and a turnover-prone quarterback, certainly getting yourself upside easily. And then the Green Bay Packers against St. Louis, one of the few that had a great matchup this week and actually really paid off. Only give up 3 points against the Niners. Granted, it was a terrible offense, but they didn't move the ball at all. And I mean, part of that's Colin Kaepernick, but they were great value last week. Now facing a Rams team that, was the team that faced the Cardinals, and they were the good matchup for them. And this is still not a good St. Louis offense. This is a team that had a couple big plays by Tavon Austin, and then a couple long runs by Todd Gurley late. And aside from those maybe 4 plays, this was still a pretty stagnant offense that didn't move the ball. So I'm on board with you here on the Packers.
Yeah, Todd Gurley really bailed out St. Louis last week, and I'm guessing that game flow won't work in his favor this time. Green Bay, that offense, I'm guessing they could jump out to a pretty good lead, force St. Louis into some predictable passing situations, and that's a very good spot for the Packers defense at home here. So they're a little bit cheaper than Arizona in some of the top plays, so digging down a little bit deeper, I think that they're a pretty good per dollar play on both sides.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And then value play, first off, you've got the Ravens. The important part of this one is the parentheses versus Cleveland. Obviously, this is an offense that over the past 2 weeks has moved the ball and scored points, but you got to take into account the fact that these two defenses were the Raiders and the Chargers, two defenses that are probably bottom 5 in the entire league right now, depending on what metric you measure them by. But both those defenses have been terrible. The Ravens haven't been a great defense, but at the same time, this is still just not a good Cleveland offense. They don't have a go-to guy on offense. I mean, you're looking at Gary Barnidge as a guy that got a bunch of looks. Duke Johnson caught a big pass out of the backfield. I mean, they still don't have many playmakers on this offense that you worry about. So, I mean, the Ravens, well-coached defensive unit, another game they really need to win to get back in the playoff race. I expect big things out of them this week, too.
Yeah, and they've been up and down all season. So, I mean, you don't really love this defense. You know, if you're playing season long, they're not a defense you're going to pick up and just ride for the rest of the year. I mean, this is a pure matchup play against Cleveland, who really can't consistently move the ball now. They haven't all season, really. So, at home, favored. I think the Ravens are a decent value play.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And then next up, the Giants against San Francisco. Another one of those, the verse San Francisco being a very important part of this. We've seen Colin Kaepernick over the past 2 weeks through 2 pick sixes against Arizona. And I think it was his first 4 throws. Then they scored a whole 3 points against the Packers last week. And it doesn't look like he's going anywhere. He's not going to be benched. You got Blaine Gabbert backing him up. He's not going to be coming in and taking over anytime soon. And there's a Giants team that, you know, against a mobile quarterback and a successful mobile quarterback last week, Tyrod Taylor forced him into some tough plays and really just didn't give him many opportunities. I mean, there were a couple touchdowns called back in that one, but obviously there were penalties there. So the Giants have been a surprisingly good defense, and I mean, I would play most defenses in a tournament against San Francisco right now.
Yeah, and you have to like that, San Francisco going east, that cross-country trip, maybe factors in a little bit. And then you have Colin Kaepernick, a turnover-prone quarterback without much of an offensive line in front of him. I mean, that's just a great recipe to stream the Giants this week. And, I mean, New York's been pretty respectable against the run. I'm guessing they can shut down the running game again against San Francisco, who Carlos Hyde really hasn't done anything outside of that Week 1 performance. So they can shut down the run, force Kaepernick into some throwing situations, and that's a good spot for any defense to be in, and especially the surprising Giants defense.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. Just load up the box, make Kaepernick make some bad decisions, bad throws as he's been, and it's probably going to be a pretty successful strategy moving forward with that terrible offense. The Falcons against Washington. This one's one of my favorite GPP plays you mentioned here. We know Kirk Cousins had himself a good game last week. It was also really high wind, so maybe they were still terrible throws. They just kind of got aided by the wind. I mean, if you want to go down that narrative road, obviously that's not really the case. But he's still a turnover-prone quarterback, makes a lot of mistakes, and it's a running game that has multiple guys involved, but none of them have shown up as big weapons. You got Deshaun Jackson. Maybe he's back, maybe he's not. I mean, there's just not much going for this offense, and they make so many mistakes that a team like Atlanta, who's just absolutely on fire on offense too, imagine they're going to be able to get ahead to a decent lead in this one, forcing Cousins to throw more than he likes to and more than the Redskins would like him to, and that's going to be bad news for them.
Yeah, you basically said it all. One thing I would note is that maybe Atlanta has a higher than usual ownership percentage this week because they put up a solid performance last time around, getting 2 defensive touchdowns against the Texans, even if one of them was a garbage touchdown in the last seconds of the game. But yeah, I mean, a similar situation could occur against Washington. I know Cousins has been a little better as of late, but he's still, the same turnover-prone QB that we've seen over the past 2 seasons. So playing on the road, maybe some desperation throws later in the game, just trying to keep pace with this Atlanta offense. I like the way things line up.
Yeah, that's a good call there. Next up, the Broncos at Oakland. And we've seen Oakland was terrible offense week 1, a good offense 2 and 3. This past week, not a very good offense. Now they get a tough matchup against the Broncos, who are, one of, if not the most talented defensive unit in the entire league, if you ask me. Definitely up there, if not number 1. And, you've got Derek Carr. He's still a young quarterback. Had some struggles last week. And, you just wonder about this offense. It seemed like things were trending up. Kind of took a step back against not a very good Bears defense last week. So this one, I think, like you mentioned in your article here, 10 to 12% roughly. I feel like they're going to be lower owned than they probably should in this matchup.
Yeah, it's definitely just a tournament play because that Oakland offense has been decent. But, I mean, just they're very young. And if a couple things go wrong, I could just see a snowball of momentum working against them. And you really don't want that happening against a talented Denver defense. So, it might be worth a stab in a GPP, just, backing this Broncos defense here. So, I might have it if I have about 5 or 6 tournament lineups on DraftKings or FanDuel. I might give 1 or 2 to the Broncos defense.
Yeah, I like that. And then next up, some hate for my Cincinnati Bengals, and I don't blame you here because the Seattle defense, since Cam Chancellor's come back, looks like the terrifying defense we see the last couple of years. And yes, Andy Dalton has looked better, but I still, as a Bengals fan, want to be a believer. But you haven't seen an elite defense yet. This is an elite defense, so I mean, this is a good test for Seattle's defense and for Cincinnati offense. So something's got to give here because both have been very good over the past couple weeks. And I think, like you mentioned here, they probably will go under-owned because the Bengals have looked good. But if we see primetime Dalton, big game Dalton show up, then we could see a couple touchdowns go in the opposite direction pretty quick.
Yeah, it's not all hate for the Bengals. I mean, I wrote in here that they're on the road against the quality Cincinnati offense. So, I mean, I gave him that. But then, again, I also wrote that Andy Dalton likes to beat up on bad teams, but he's not so good against, the top-level competition. So, if that Andy Dalton comes out, the Andy Dalton with cable, that is, not the Andy Dalton with DirecTV, if he shows his face, maybe, even though it's at home, a couple interceptions, maybe a pick six. I mean, there's outside chance of that happening. So the Seahawks, I'm expecting them to be maybe more popular than they should be because of the matchup, or, due to the matchup, but just because they have that name recognition and they've been good over the past 2 weeks. So, but still, I think a lot of the sharps will be off of them. A lot of the people looking at the algorithms, looking at just the matchup plays, they'll probably shy away from Seattle on the road. So that, kind of warrants tournament consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a Jekyll and Hyde Andy Dalton we've seen for the last 4 years. So until we see it for at least a half a season, we'll see if he's actually really turned a corner. Last up, the Patriots at Dallas. This at Dallas is getting less and less intimidating by the week. You had Des Bryant go down, then Tony Romo went down, now Lance Dunbar, who had emerged as a big part of this offense, is down too. The Patriots coming off a bye week, well rested, essentially facing a whole bunch of backups and not a very talented offensive group. We've seen this before, big games with the Patriots, especially on primetime games or big road games, obviously games in Dallas like this. Seen them show up in a big way, and I really like them as a tournament play this week.
Yeah, I do too, and I kind of said in this article that I'm expecting them to have a nice game plan coming off that bye to shut down the running game with Joseph Randle, basically forcing Brandon Weeden or maybe Matt Castle. I've heard some rumblings that he might get thrust into action at some point. Probably have a good game plan against those guys, against some, I don't want to say scrub wide receivers, but just wide receivers that the casual fan really hasn't heard of, like Terrence Williams and Cole Beasley. So I think the Patriots will have a relatively low ownership percentage, and a week like this when there's no clear-cut favorite, I think it makes a lot of sense to maybe put them in there on a tournament lineup and even have borderline cash game consideration.
Yeah, and the way we've seen this Dallas defense play recently, especially in clutch time, you really don't have much faith in them slowing down the Patriots offense, which could be forcing Dallas to throw the ball anyway. Lance Dunbar being out, I think, could be even bigger of a factor than we realize at this point. So yeah. I'm with you there. Loving the Patriots. All right, great stuff here. Check us out on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Check out all the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.